key ally, Theodoric the Visigoth, has just been killed. Theodoric's son, Thorismund, now took command of the Visigoths. Luckily for Aetius, the loss of their king drove them on to avenge his death. Their horsemen plowed into the ranks of the Hun army, and suddenly it was Attila who was feeling the pressure. The Huns suffered huge casualties. With the Visigoths in full cry, the Romans found themselves with the upper hand. The only trouble was, there was no time to exploit this advantage. The sun had set, there was no more light, and chaos reigned on the battlefield of Chalons.
In the darkness, forces became detached. Aetius himself, much as Stonewall Jackson, got detached from his forces and was all but lost, and then found his troops.
In the darkness, Thorismund mistook the Huns for his own troops and came close to being killed or captured. The Visigoths were lucky not to lose 2 kings in one day.
Night battles are ferocious, and the thing is, you need to disengage, because you can't control the situation.
Attila was able to escape to his wagon camp. The darkness had saved his army from annihilation. He had 2 choices: inspire his troops for another day's fierce combat, or retreat and live to fight another day.
So in the worst hour of the Hunnish army's existence, when they were surrounded, they'd been defeated, what did Attila do? He deliberately screamed, yelled, he showed his masculinity, his fearlessness, and then he actually created a funeral pyre and threatened to immolate himself. So little did he value his own life, and so much did he value the reputation that he would die undefeated.
Neither of these 2 great commanders, they didn't know what the casualties were that they had inflicted. They knew, however, that their own troops were terribly bloodied. These 2 armies had exhausted themselves.
Aetius probably got little sleep. He was left with a real dilemma. On the one hand, he had the opportunity to crush Attila once and for all. On the other, he had to consider the future security of the empire. The Visigoths had only supported him because of Attila's invasion. The Vandals were also unreliable. These tribes only stayed in line because of a Hun menace. Remove that and warfare could break out all over the West.
There was the perception that maybe the destruction of the Hunnish army might embolden other tribes that are now our allies, but after the battle will be our enemies.
And back at Ravenna, the governing center of the empire, the Emperor Valentinian was worried that Aetius was now the most powerful man in the West. To the people, he was the heir to the Roman generals of old. Already they were calling him the last of the Romans.
The next morning, it's essentially a stalemate. The Huns are in possession of their lager, and the Romans are in possession of the battlefield, which meant that the Romans won. But the Huns were still there.
The ancient sources tell us that Aetius only reached his decision on the following morning, when 2 things happened. First, the body of Theodoric was recovered, and his son Thorismund was proclaimed to be the new king of the Visigoths. Second, it was obvious that Attila was trying to pull out rather than prepare for another battle.
Attila withdrew the next day because he realized that his army was in no condition. Once the dawn rose and they saw that horrific carnage on the battlefield and tens of thousands of people had been killed, he realized he was in no position to press home the attack.
Aetius knew his own personal standing was high. He had just beaten Attila the Hun, the scourge of Europe. But could he trust the Visigoths now that they had a new king? And what about Gaiseric the Vandal? The Hun invasion had been his idea. Aetius had done enough. Attila was in retreat. The West was safe. He decided to take his close-fought victory and attempt to strengthen the Roman position.
I think that what the battle did was it brought people together. It brought the military and political forces of the empire in the West together one last time.
The mauling that Aetius gave Attila at Chalons was to prove the deciding factor. True to form, the Huns launched another lightning campaign against the Romans the following year. They swept down into Italy, utterly destroying the land as they went. But a Roman counter-strike against Attila's own land across the Danube was enough to make Attila agree to a peace. He just didn't have the men to protect his borders any longer. Aetius had killed too many of them at Chalons. The following year, Attila the Hun died, as he had lived, bloodily. He married a young bride and drank so much that when he had a nosebleed, he drowned in his own blood. Without their fearsome leader, the empire of the Huns splintered and fell apart. And as for Aetius, his story ends badly as well. A few years after Chalons, he tried to marry Eudoxia, the daughter of Valentinian. In a jealous rage, Valentinian stabbed him to death. The last of the Romans was killed by his own emperor.